Officer Paul Kessler, bearing badge designation 4791, had spent 3 years patrolling Riverside Park and harbored his own convictions regarding individuals who were deemed suitable for its presence and those who were not. Upon observing a black gentleman in disheveled attire seated alone on a park bench, he approached with palpable animosity, issuing a directive to vacate and a stern admonishment. "This is your final caution. Remove your black self from this park, or you will be taken into custody." What Officer Kessler was unaware of was that Leonard Hayes was not an individual experiencing homelessness. He was an undercover operative of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, merely 10 minutes away from a significant development in an ongoing 6-month narcotics inquiry. Furthermore, his entire team was monitoring the situation via surveillance equipment. Every prejudiced utterance was being meticulously documented, and this encounter was destined to precipitate the demise of Officer Kessler's professional tenure and jeopardize a critical federal operation aimed at dismantling a formidable criminal organization involved in illicit substances. Before we proceed, could you inform us from which city or country you are observing this program? Kindly share this information in the comments section. We genuinely appreciate knowing your viewership locations. If you firmly believe that existing within a public area should not constitute an offense, and that no individual should be compelled to depart or face apprehension based solely on their outward appearance, then please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Leonard Hayes had been occupying the identical park bench for the preceding 4 hours. To any casual observer, he presented as merely another indigent person passing the time on a Tuesday afternoon. At 38 years of age, with 12 years of dedicated service as a special agent for the FBI, Leonard had cultivated a profound understanding that successful covert operations necessitated an absolute immersion in the assigned role. His garments were deliberately chosen for their worn and stained appearance, procured from a second-hand establishment, and subsequently subjected to weeks of intentional wear to further enhance their authenticity. His facial hair was unkempt, his hair was in need of a trim, and the weathered military-style backpack situated beside him appeared to contain his entire worldly possessions. However, concealed within that backpack, beneath a layer of genuine survival provisions for individuals without shelter, resided $50,000 worth of sophisticated FBI surveillance apparatus. This included encrypted communication devices, high-definition cameras, and recording instruments that were presently transmitting all ambient activity to a mobile command post strategically situated 2 blocks distant. Leonard was 18 weeks into Operation Viper Den, a multifaceted investigation targeting the Cordio drug trafficking organization, which had designated Riverside Park as a primary nexus for its distribution network. The organization was characterized by its advanced operational capacity, its propensity for violence, and its meticulous security protocols. They employed a system of rotating operatives, utilized coded language, and conducted their illicit activities openly amidst the unsuspecting presence of joggers and families who frequented the park on a daily basis. Leonard had dedicated several months to meticulously constructing his guise, sleeping on park benches, partaking of meals at soup kitchens, and progressively becoming a recognizable figure to both the transient population and the lower echelon individuals involved in drug sales within the park. He had painstakingly and with considerable effort cultivated their trust, and he was now on the cusp of a significant breakthrough. On this particular day, at precisely 3 o'clock, 2 mid-level operatives within the Cordio organization were scheduled to convene at a picnic table situated 50 yards from Leonard's position. This meeting promised to furnish the FBI with invaluable intelligence pertaining to their supply chains and distribution methodologies. Such information, held the potential to facilitate indictments reaching all the way up to the organization's highest leadership echelon. It was precisely 2:47 p.m. when Leonard first observed the arrival of one of his designated targets. Carlos Vega, a 32-year-old distributor with established connections to the Cordio syndicate, took a seat at the predetermined picnic table and proceeded to engage with his mobile phone. The second individual of interest, Ramon Torres, was expected to arrive within the ensuing few minutes. Leonard subtly adjusted his posture on the bench, orienting his body in such a manner that the concealed camera within his backpack maintained an unobstructed line of sight to the planned meeting location. Into his earpiece, barely discernible, he could discern the voice of Supervisory Special Agent Jennifer Park, his team leader, confirming visual acquisition from the surveillance van. All elements of the operation were proceeding precisely as anticipated, and then Officer Paul Kessler entered the park and observed Leonard seated upon the bench. Officer Kessler had been employed by the Central Police Department for a period of 7 years. For the past 3 of those years, Riverside Park had been an integral component of his routine patrol assignments. He perceived himself as the park's unofficial custodian, the officer responsible for ensuring its safety and cleanliness for the families and recreational users who utilized it appropriately. In his estimation, this responsibility entailed the exclusion of undesirable elements, the homeless, individuals struggling with addiction, and those who occupied benches for extended periods, thereby detracting from the park's overall aesthetic. Officer Kessler's personnel file contained a record of 23 civilian complaints, 18 of which pertained to allegations of harassment or the unwarranted application of force against individuals experiencing homelessness or members of minority groups. Internal Affairs had conducted 2 reviews of his conduct, identifying recurring patterns of concern, yet no significant disciplinary actions had been instituted. Officer Kessler was cognizant of his superior's desire to maintain a pristine park environment, and he genuinely believed he was fulfilling his professional obligations when he approached individuals who did not conform to his preconceived notion of appropriate park patrons. Upon observing Leonard on the bench, Officer Kessler perceived precisely what his inherent biases directed him to see: a black man clad in shabby clothing, accompanied by a backpack, presumably homeless, and unequivocally someone who should not be occupying valuable space that could be utilized by families. Officer Kessler did not entertain the possibility that the individual might be legitimately resting. He gave no consideration to whether any actual infraction of the law had occurred. He simply concluded that individuals of that ilk diminished the park's appeal, and it was his duty to dislodge them. He advanced directly toward the bench with the determined gait of someone who had executed such an action numerous times previously and anticipated swift compliance. Leonard observed Officer Kessler's approach and felt an unsettling tension in his stomach. This was the most inopportune moment imaginable. Carlos Vega was mere 50 yards away, and Ramon Torres was imminent. The meeting that Leonard had anticipated for 6 months was on the verge of commencement, and now a patrol officer was advancing directly towards him. In his earpiece, he detected Agent Park's voice, tinged with urgency and hushed tones. "We have visual. Maintain your cover. Do not break character unless absolutely imperative." Officer Kessler halted directly in front of the bench, his shadow cast across Leonard. "You need to leave, now." Leonard raised his gaze slowly, maintaining his characterization of an individual who had been living rough for months. "I am merely resting here. I am not causing any disturbance." Officer Kessler's expression hardened. "I do not want your kind in this park. Get up and depart before I compel you to." Leonard felt the impact of the words as if they were physical blows, yet he maintained a calm and measured tone. "My kind? What law am I violating? This is a public park. Do not speak insolently to me, boy, Officer Kessler retorted, the derogatory term emerging with effortless fluidity. I instructed you to leave. We do not require individuals such as yourself in the vicinity, deterring families. Within Leonard's earpiece, Agent Park's voice conveyed sharp indignation, yet she maintained operational composure. Leonard, do not engage. Preserve your cover. We are evaluating potential courses of action. Leonard kept his gaze fixed on Officer Kessler, acutely aware that every syllable was being recorded by the wire concealed beneath his worn shirt. I possess the right to be present here. Officer Kessler moved closer, his hand casually resting upon the taser holstered at his duty belt. The implicit threat was overt and deliberate. Rights, you are trespassing. This is your final warning. Prepare to be taken into custody. 50 yards distant, Ramon Torres was progressing towards the picnic table where Carlos Vega awaited. The meeting was on the verge of commencing. 6 months of meticulous work, hundreds of hours dedicated to surveillance, the painstaking cultivation of cover and trust. All of it was converging at the precise moment when Officer Paul Kessler had determined that a black man seated on a park bench necessitated forceful removal. Leonard's mind rapidly assessed his available options. If he acquiesced and departed, the entire operation would be rendered futile. If he revealed his true identity, his cover would be compromised and the operation would still fail. If he refused to comply with the order to move, Officer Kessler would proceed with his arrest, prompting the dealers to perceive police presence and consequently disperse. There was no advantageous outcome, only the necessity of damage mitigation. In his ear, Agent Park made the decisive call for him. All units move in. We are extracting him. The operation is compromised. Before Leonard could offer a verbal response, Officer Kessler reached for his arm. I commanded you to rise. You are accompanying me. Leonard withdrew his arm, not in an aggressive manner, but defensively, ensuring his hands remained clearly visible. I am not leaving. You have no legal justification to detain me. That constitutes resistance, Officer Kessler declared, his hand transitioning from his taser to his handcuffs. You have just exacerbated your situation considerably. In the distance, Leonard detected the sound of car doors opening. The FBI team was en route, but they were still 2 blocks away. Meanwhile, Ramon Torres was seating himself at the picnic table, and Carlos Vega was retrieving a small package. 6 months of diligent effort were unraveling in real time because a police officer had observed a black man on a park bench and harbored an assumption that was poised to obliterate both of their careers in entirely divergent fashions. Officer Kessler grasped Leonard's wrist, and Leonard understood that within the ensuing 60 seconds, everything would irrevocably change. Officer Kessler's grip on Leonard's wrist was firm and aggressive, a hold designed to assert dominance rather than ensure safety. Leonard maintained his free hand, raised and visible, fully aware that any perceived movement could be construed as resistance. 50 yards away, Carlos Vega and Ramon Torres were leaning across the picnic table, initiating their discussion. The clandestine meeting Leonard had anticipated for 6 months was occurring at that very instant, and he was being physically restrained by an officer who had unilaterally decided his presence constituted a transgression. I am not resisting, Leonard stated unequivocally, his voice betraying none of the burgeoning anger within him. You are apprehending me without probable cause. I have committed no infraction of the law. Officer Kessler twisted Leonard's arm behind his back, forcing him to turn. I instructed you to leave, and you refused. That is trespassing. You are now resisting arrest. Continue speaking, and I shall add charges of disorderly conduct. In Leonard's earpiece, Agent Park's voice was sharp with urgency. 30 seconds out. Attempt to delay without compromising your cover. Leonard made one final effort to de-escalate the situation, recognizing its futility, but driven by the imperative to meticulously document every attempt on the recording device. "Officer, I implore you to consult with your supervisor before proceeding. I assure you, you are making a grave error." "The only error here is your assumption that you can occupy this park all day," Officer Kessler retorted, withdrawing his handcuffs. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back, or I will take you to the ground." A woman jogging past slowed her pace, observing the unfolding confrontation with evident concern. She produced her mobile phone and commenced recording. Officer Kessler noticed her actions and pointed in her direction. "Madam, kindly continue your movement. This is a police matter." The jogger did not lower her phone. "He is merely sitting on a bench." "What has he done?" "I said, keep moving," Officer Kessler barked, his voice escalating with palpable irritation. At the picnic table, Ramon Torres glanced towards the commotion. He observed a police officer with his hands on an individual, witnessed the jogger recording, and his demeanor shifted instantaneously. He exchanged a few rapid words with Carlos Vega, and both men rose to their feet. The package that had been resting on the table disappeared into Carlos's jacket. They then proceeded to walk in divergent directions, exhibiting a practiced casualness indicative of individuals adept at vacating a scene without appearing to flee. A black SUV entered the parking lot at the park's periphery, proceeding at a brisk pace, though without activating its lights or siren. 3 individuals clad in FBI windbreakers disembarked and began moving with purpose towards Leonard's location. Officer Kessler, preoccupied with the task of securing the handcuffs on Leonard, had not yet noticed their arrival, but other park patrons did observe the federal agents and began to point. Leonard perceived his team's approach and understood that the critical moment had arrived. There was no longer any possibility of salvaging the operation, no means of maintaining his cover with FBI agents converging upon him across the park. The sole remaining objectives were to prevent further escalation and to ensure that every utterance and action by Officer Kessler was meticulously documented for subsequent review. "Officer Kessler," Leonard stated, addressing him by name for the first time, "I will reiterate this one final time. You must cease your current actions immediately." Officer Kessler snapped a cuff onto Leonard's wrist, applying pressure with unnecessary force. "I do not take orders from you. You are under arrest." Agent Park reached them first, her FBI credentials already presented and held aloft. "Federal agent, release this man without delay." Officer Kessler froze, his hand still firmly gripping Leonard's arm, the handcuff dangling from one wrist. He regarded Agent Park with a mixture of confusion and mounting apprehension. "What? I am conducting a lawful arrest." 2 additional FBI agents arrived flanking Agent Park. One of them, a tall gentleman identified as Agent Marcus Webb, gestured towards Leonard. "That individual is a federal agent engaged in an authorized undercover operation. You have just compromised a 6-month investigation." Officer Kessler's countenance cycled through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, disbelief, followed by the nascent onset of fear as the magnitude of his actions began to dawn upon him. "How was I supposed to ascertain that? He appeared to be homeless." "He was supposed to appear homeless," Agent Park stated, her voice cold with carefully controlled anger. "That is the essence of undercover work." She gestured across the park towards the direction in which Ramon Torres and Carlos Vega had vanished. "Those 2 individuals whom you just alarmed were key targets in a significant narcotics investigation. We were merely 10 minutes away from acquiring recorded evidence that would have definitively linked them to a drug trafficking organization responsible for the movement of millions of dollars worth of product, and you have effectively terminated that endeavor because you deemed a man sitting on a park bench to be in violation and requiring removal. Officer Kessler released Leonard's arm as if it had suddenly become searing hot. Leonard withdrew his hand and detached the single handcuff that had been attached, rubbing his wrist where the metal had already begun to leave a crimson mark. Agent Park moved closer to Officer Kessler, positioning herself at a proximity that precluded other park users from overhearing, yet ensuring that the recording equipment Leonard was wearing would capture every word. Retrieve your notepad and meticulously record your name, badge number, and the contact information for your supervisor. You will require all of this, as the FBI will be submitting a formal complaint to your department. Furthermore, depending on the findings of our review of your professional history, there may be grounds for federal civil rights charges. Officer Kessler's hand trembled slightly as he retrieved his notepad and inscribed the requested information. The self-assured demeanor he had exhibited mere minutes earlier had dissipated entirely, supplanted by the dawning realization that his career had just experienced a catastrophic derailment. Leonard observed him, still attired in his undercover ensemble, maintaining his role even though the operation had concluded. The concealed wire beneath his shirt had meticulously documented every single detail, every slur, every threat, every instance of Officer Kessler's prejudiced assumption that a black man in shabby clothing lacked the fundamental right to exist within a public park, and that irrefutable recording was now poised to accompany Officer Paul Kessler for the remainder of his regrettably truncated law enforcement career. 2 hours later, Officer Paul Kessler occupied a seat in a conference room at Central Police Headquarters, accompanied by his union representative. Seated across the table were his captain, the department's internal affairs lieutenant, and 2 representatives from the FBI, Special Agent Jennifer Park, and the very individual whom Kessler had attempted to arrest, now impeccably dressed in a sharp suit with his FBI credentials conspicuously clipped to his lapel. The transformation was striking. The individual who had appeared as a homeless man in the park was no longer present, replaced by a federal agent who possessed an air of authority befitting a courtroom. Captain Richard Morrison opened a folder placed on the table and addressed Kessler with barely suppressed anger. "Officer Kessler, the FBI has lodged some rather serious allegations regarding your conduct this afternoon. Before we commence, I wish to make one matter unequivocally clear. Anything you state in this room will become part of the official record. Do you comprehend?" Kessler nodded, his throat feeling constricted. "Yes, sir." Agent Park placed a small digital recording device on the table. "This is the audio captured by Special Agent Hayes' wire. He was equipped with recording apparatus throughout your entire interaction. We will now proceed to play it." She pressed the play button, and Kessler's voice resonated through the room. "You need to leave now," followed by Leonard's measured reply, and then Kessler's escalating pronouncements. "I do not want your kind in this park." The words sounded considerably more egregious in the hushed confines of the conference room than they had in the open air of the park. When the recording reached the segment where Kessler uttered, "Get your black ass out of this park or you're going in cuffs," his union representative closed his eyes and offered a subtle shake of his head. The recording continued for a total of 6 minutes, meticulously documenting every threat, every slur, and every manifestation of aggression. Upon its conclusion, the silence that descended upon the room was palpable and deeply uncomfortable. Captain Morrison spoke first. "Officer Kessler, would you care to elaborate on what I have just heard?" Kessler's face was flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and defensive indignation. "I was unaware that he was with the FBI. I believed him to be indigent. We have received complaints regarding individuals experiencing homelessness within that park." "Complaints concerning what, specifically?" Agent Park inquired, her voice sharp with challenge. "Regarding individuals occupying benches. regarding individuals present in public spaces, about loitering, about causing discomfort to families. Leonard spoke for the first time since entering the room, his voice calm, but possessing an underlying intensity that commanded immediate attention. I was not loitering. I was seated peacefully on a public bench during park operating hours. I was not consuming alcohol. I was not using illicit substances. I was not harassing anyone. I was engaged in absolutely no unlawful activity. You approached me with overt hostility based upon my appearance. I was performing my duty, Kessler insisted. Your duty? Leonard repeated. He leaned forward slightly. Allow me to illuminate you regarding my profession, Officer Kessler. I am a veteran of 12 years with the FBI. Prior to that, I served 4 years in Army intelligence. My specialization lies in organized crime and narcotics trafficking. I've undertaken undercover assignments in 8 distinct operations across 4 different states. I've provided testimony in federal court on 23 separate occasions. I am proficient in 3 languages. I hold a master's degree in criminal justice, and for the past 6 months, I've been living within Riverside Park, diligently constructing a case against the Cordero Drug Organization. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. I slept on park benches. I partook of sustenance at homeless shelters. I cultivated friendships with other individuals lacking shelter to solidify my cover. I undertook all of this because the Cordero organization bears responsibility for trafficking millions of dollars worth of narcotics, for perpetrating violence that has claimed 17 lives in this city, and for fostering addiction that has devastated countless families. Today, I was merely 10 minutes away from recording a meeting that would have furnished us with the conclusive evidence necessary to indict mid-level operatives and systematically dismantle the organization up to its leadership. 6 months of dedicated work, hundreds of hours of surveillance, and you effectively obliterated it all within a mere 5 minutes because you observed a black man seated on a bench and concluded that I did not belong there. The Internal Affairs Lieutenant accessed information on his laptop. Officer Kessler, according to your record, you have accumulated 23 civilian complaints. 18 of these involve individuals experiencing homelessness or members of minority groups. You have been flagged on 2 separate occasions for patterns of discriminatory enforcement. Did you derive no lessons from those reviews? Kessler began to respond, but his union representative placed a hand on his arm, signaling him to desist. Agent Park opened her own file. The FBI has thoroughly reviewed Officer Kessler's complaint history. We have also examined his arrest records, his stop reports, and records of his use of force incidents. We have identified a discernible pattern of targeting individuals based on their appearance and racial background. We are formally recommending a federal civil rights investigation into his conduct. Kessler's face turned ashen. Federal investigation? You interfered with a federal operation, Agent Park stated icily. You employed racial slurs against a federal agent. You threatened an unlawful arrest. You apprehended him without legal justification. Yes, Officer Kessler. Federal investigation. Captain Morrison closed his folder. Officer Kessler, you are hereby suspended without pay, effective immediately. This suspension will remain in effect pending the resolution of both the internal departmental investigation and the federal review. You must relinquish your badge and service firearm. Kessler remained frozen, incapable of grasping the swiftness with which his life was unraveling. Leonard rose, cast one last look down at him, and delivered the most chilling truth of all. If you had subjected an actual destitute individual to this treatment, would anyone have been present at this moment? Would the Federal Bureau of Investigation have materialized? Would you have faced suspension? The sole reason you're confronted with repercussions is that you happen to target someone who possesses a badge. Ponder this, Officer Kessler. Reflect upon the number of individuals you have subjected to this behavior who lack the fortitude to resist. He exited the conference chamber, leaving Kessler seated at the table with his professional life in disarray and the full burden of his preconceived notions finally coming to bear. Officer Paul Kessler was dismissed from the Central Police Department 6 weeks following the occurrence in Riverside Park. The letter of termination cited numerous infractions, including racial prejudice, harassment, obstruction of a federal inquiry, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Due to his dismissal for cause, Kessler forfeited his pension after 7 years of service. He lost his health care coverage. He lost everything he had cultivated within law enforcement. Furthermore, the widespread dissemination of the audio recording guaranteed he would never again be employed as a police officer. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's scrutiny into Kessler's actions extended beyond the singular encounter with Leonard Hayes. Federal investigators meticulously examined 7 years of arrest logs, stop reports, and complaint files. They uncovered a pattern that was both evident and troubling. 87% of Kessler's stops in Riverside Park involved individuals who were either black or Latino. 92% of the complaints lodged against him for harassment originated from individuals experiencing homelessness or from minority groups. The evidence pointed to systematic profiling predicated on race and socioeconomic standing, a recurring issue that had been documented in internal reviews but never addressed with genuine seriousness until a federal agent became the target. The Department of Justice initiated civil rights charges against Kessler 4 months after his dismissal. The charges encompassed the deprivation of rights under the color of law and obstruction of justice. Kessler's legal counsel reviewed the audio recording within the Federal Bureau of Investigation's evidence dossier and provided the identical counsel that had been offered to other officers in comparable predicaments. Except a plea agreement. Contesting federal charges supported by recorded evidence of racial epithets and threats was a battle no jury would likely support. Kessler entered a guilty plea to obstruction and civil rights violations. He received a sentence of 10 months in federal prison and 2 years of supervised probation. He would be permanently barred from any law enforcement role anywhere within the United States. At the age of 34, burdened by a felony conviction and a recording of his racist remarks accessible to anyone with an internet connection, Kessler found himself employed in warehouse positions for minimum wage, residing in a modest apartment 40 meters from the very city where he had once patrolled with authority. The Cordero drug investigation, which Kessler had compromised, required an additional 14 months to reconstruct. The Federal Bureau of Investigation assigned a new undercover operative and devised an alternative strategy. However, the delay had tangible ramifications. Throughout those 14 months, the Cordy organization persisted in its illicit operations, distributing narcotics that perpetuated addiction and violence throughout the metropolis. When the operation finally concluded with 26 arrests and the confiscation of over $6 million in narcotics, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's final report included a section detailing how Officer Kessler's interference had prolonged the timeline and enabled the organization to inflict further harm before its dismantlement. Leonard Hayes received a commendation from the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for his contributions to Operation Viper Den and his professional demeanor during his confrontation with Kessler. He continued his work on undercover assignments and became an instructor at the Federal Bureau of Investigation Academy, educating new agents on maintaining cover under duress and navigating unexpected challenges in the field. He also became a vocal proponent within federal law enforcement for safeguarding vulnerable populations during operations, advocating for policies that ensured individuals experiencing homelessness and others utilized as cover identities were treated with dignity and respect. The Central Police Department instituted extensive reforms in response to the federal inquiry. Officers underwent mandatory training on implicit bias and constitutional policing practices. The department established new protocols mandating supervisors to review all stops involving individuals experiencing homelessness. A civilian oversight board was created, vested with genuine authority to investigate complaints. 5 other officers with similar patterns in their complaint histories were quietly encouraged to resign rather than face formal disciplinary action. The audio recording of Kessler's transgressions became instructional material for police academies nationwide, employed to illustrate how prejudice can derail investigations and careers. Leonard participated in some of these training sessions, standing before rooms filled with recruits and recounting precisely how it felt to be subjected to slurs and threatened with arrest while performing his duties. He invariably concluded with the same message: assumptions are perilous. Every individual merits dignity, and the badge represents a responsibility, not a license to devalue human beings. 5 years after that afternoon in Riverside Park, Leonard was elevated to the rank of supervisory special agent and assigned to train undercover operatives across multiple field offices. Paul Kessler was still engaged in manual labor, still living with the consequences of 5 minutes of poor judgment. When he observed a black man on a bench and formed assumptions that cost him everything, the lesson remained straightforward and enduring. Profiling devastates lives on both sides. Evidence is irrefutable, and treating individuals as criminals based on their appearance can terminate the career of the person making that determination. The distinction was that Leonard progressed with purpose and integrity, while Kessler moved forward with nothing but remorse and a recording that would forever be associated with him. Playing on a continuous loop in training rooms where novice officers learned precisely what not to emulate. If you have ever been told that you do not belong in a particular place solely based on your appearance, this narrative was intended for you. Share it with someone who needs to comprehend that simply existing while black, while impoverished, while different is not an offense. It is merely existence. What changes would render public spaces truly accessible to all? Share your perspectives below. And if you believe no one should be compelled to prove their intrinsic value merely to occupy a park bench, subscribe immediately. We are exposing more stories where bias encountered consequences and ultimately failed.